Tanzania is sending out signals to the world that it wants to become a major trading destination. President Samia Suluhu Hassan took advantage of her speech at the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly to woo investors from the U.S. and the European Union to the country, promising a raft of policy changes that will make the business environment investor-friendly. It's been 6 years since a Tanzanian president last addressed the UNGA, and President Hassan used her address to market her country as a trading destination. This bold marketing statement is followed by some rather grim reports from a development partner. The International Monetary Fund states that Tanzania requires urgent financial support of $1.1 billion in the next 12 months to avert a potential economic fallout. The IMF, in its latest country report for Tanzania, said that the country faces an urgent balance of payment support as the government implements a comprehensive plan to tackle the COVID-19 shock in the wake of declining export receipts. The report further explained that emergency imports of medicines, testing materials, and protective equipment are urgently needed in response to the third wave of the pandemic. Today, we'll be looking at the concerns being raised on Tanzania's economic outlook. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Ken Gichinga. He's the chief economist at Mentora Economics. Now, Ken, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. All right, there we go.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so let's start with a bit of background in terms of what is going on with Tanzania at this moment. A number of developments that we're seeing, but also in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, they've taken a hit. But it wasn't exactly this picture in 2020. So as of March 2020, the IMF reported that, supported by prudent monetary and fiscal policies, Tanzania's economic conditions were stable, with economic growth estimated at about 6%. Inflation was also under 5%. But now the economy has reportedly decelerated to 4.8% growth in 2020, and growth is expected to remain subdued in 2021. Aside from the issues with tourism, which is such a major driver for the economy, what other issues have led Tanzania to this point in time where concerns are coming about regarding the economy?
Well, indeed, we are seeing a remarkably different Tanzania under President Suluhu. She chose to go to New York to address the General Assembly and really present a global perspective to Tanzania's conditions. This was remarkably different from her predecessor, Magufuli, who really didn't spend much time outside Tanzania, really never traveled out of the African continent, and really focused on really the potential of Tanzania within an African context. So we are seeing a remarkably different political economy. Obviously, from Tanzania's perspective, tourism has been a major driver of the economic growth, and that has been hit hard by the COVID pandemic. And that really, I think, is one of the areas that has to be urgently addressed, not least because it employs quite a number of people.
So the IMF said that Tanzania's previous government under John Magufuli actually downplayed the impact of the coronavirus, and they believe that this is part of the results of that downplaying. What do you think in terms of how the former president may have spoken and acted regarding the coronavirus are some of the things that President Suluhu is having to deal with and address now?
Well, indeed, that has been stated, and former President Magufuli had very strong sentiments on not just the COVID pandemic, but really the approach it was being taken, and that has its constituency in Tanzania. I think President Suluhu has chosen to go a different path, really trying to approach it the way maybe most countries, including Kenya here, has been approaching. But still, I think there was still quite a bit of wisdom on both parts. I think Magufuli emphasized the importance of the African economy, and I think that shouldn't be lost, because really there's a lot of opportunity for intra-African trade, intra-African participation in the economy. And I think also Mama Suluhu really, in her approach towards trying to reconnect to play Tanzania on the global stage, where we are dealing with a balance of payment issues, ability to import and export, and to integrate with the rest of the world. So it really appears this is a tale of two cities. But I think what matters most is the ability to create jobs in Tanzania. And I think in the short run, really lifting those measures to have tourism back on track, I think that's important. But I think in the long term, there'll be a big focus towards sectors such as agriculture, in which Tanzania has a huge competitive advantage.
Yes, and we're going to get into where Tanzania's competitive advantage may lie. After the IMF completed the 2020 Article 4 mission to the country, the plan, they said then, was for a robust and decisive set of policies that would be critical to increase private sector investment, job creation, and also support high economic growth, as well as increasing the resilience of the country against risk. Between then and now, how much progress would you say the country has made towards achieving those goals?
Well, I think we have to step a bit back and remember that Tanzania was coming from an Ujamaa philosophy, which was more of a socialism approach to government, where really government controlled the factors of production. It has changed over the number of presidents, but I think right now there's a big consensus that starting businesses has a big potential in creating jobs. So I expect both their fiscal and the monetary policy to start looking at how easy is it to do business in Tanzania, to attract foreign investments, including from the region. And I believe that would be the proper direction for the country's economic direction.
So the additional funding need that Tanzania has now comes after the IMF board approved about a disbursement of about $567.25 million in September of 2021, just very early this month. And now we're asking, or the country rather is asking for a bit more help because it needs to balance the deficit. It needs to bridge or reduce it as much as possible. And this is an urgent balance of payment that's arising from COVID-19. Has the first approved tranche, or the previous one that I just mentioned, has that been fully dispersed? Is it being felt? Is it attending to the needs that Tanzania had at that time? And then how soon do you think the country might get a response on this new request? Or is it going to go ahead and be straight into a disbursement rather than a request for them?
Well, I think the challenge with the IMF policies tend to lie in their obsession with importation. And that's why issues of balance of payments really are at the heart of their discourse, not just with Tanzania, but with every country. This whole idea that every country has to be importing from the West or importing from other parts of the world. And there is a space for importation. But I think the narrative that Tanzania wants to find, particularly after finding how COVID can affect your linkages to the rest of the world, is how do you start building local communities? How do you start building local economies that are resilient in a pandemic or out of a pandemic? And I think that's the conversation that is most important. But yes, to your question, the lines of credit have been released. Tanzania has been able to, but it's been mostly towards buying of vaccine, equipment, and really medical supplies. There needs to be a lot more really on really conditions around business, because a lot of businesses really need to have some capital to be able to conduct business. So I think there has to be a focus on monetary policy in terms of reducing the interest rates that businesses are paying so that they can be able to hire more people and to be able to thrive.
All right, Ken, let's hold on the conversation here. When we come back, we'll look at the rapid credit facility. We'll also look at the rapid financing instrument, sort of breaking down the bit of the difference between the two, and also look at the debt situation that Tanzania is getting into. And finally, how are investors going to come into the economy? What's really going to attract them so that Tanzania can move forward, as the president has stated? You're watching Business Edge, and this is a conversation looking at some of the concerns raised around Tanzania's economic outlook after President Suluhu Hassan spoke at the United Nations General Assembly, saying, come to Tanzania. We'll continue right after this. And we are still talking about Tanzania's economic outlook. My guest joining me from Nairobi, Kenya, as we take a look at that. So, Ken, let's get back into this conversation around what we can expect in terms of possibly support for Tanzania. Now, the financing package comprises of about $189.08 million under the Rapid Credit Facility and a purchase equivalent of about $378 million under the Rapid Financing Instrument. Now, to a layman, these sound like basically the same thing involved with large amounts of money that are headed towards Tanzania. So what really is the difference between these two, I guess we'll call it, as you said, lines of credit earlier, and at what rates could Tanzania expect them? Is it a loan? Is it a disbursement? Is it a gift, as many people might want in this day and age? But what exactly is going on with the Rapid Credit Facility and the Rapid Financing Instrument?
Well, the Rapid Credit Facility is a facility, it's a loan facility to be able to help Tanzania to be able to import and to meet its balance of payments. These transactions tend to be in dollars, and that's why the importance on tourism, because tourism is one of the largest foreign exchange earners. There's also the central bank reserves. Tanzania has about $5 billion worth of reserves. That has come down significantly by about $400 million. So it's about 5.2, down from 5.8. So those are the indicators of to IMF of concern, and that's why they have to release these lines of credit. But I said earlier on, all these lines of credit are underpinned by the philosophical idea that Tanzania needs to be a major importer, particularly of key things like fuel and other products. And that's why these lines of credit. But I think the conversation that is often forgotten is, yes, there is that importation and connections to the global economy. But what really creates jobs is the local economies. And these are the local economies where agriculture is at the heart of, where ability to do local trade, ability to do domestic manufacturing. I don't find the IMF or any of the Bretton Woods institutions really spend enough time talking about the opportunities with the local economies and the ability to create jobs. And I think that's where the conversation needs to be.
And I will pick that up in just a bit when we get into looking at sectors aside from oil and gas. So let's talk a bit about the external debt that the country has now. It stands at about $24.5 billion as of April 2021. The central government owed most of this, around 77%, with the private sector accounting for about 22.5%. And a lot of the debt was inherited, but we're also talking about lines of credit, more loans coming in for Tanzania through the IMF and possibly the World Bank as well. In terms of the conversation in Tanzania around loan repayment, rescheduling, cancellation, what's the conversation going on? What are we hearing from President Suluhu Hassan in regards to that?
Well, Tanzania has always been very cautious of accumulating excessive debt. There's always been that perception that too much debt is not good for the country. And even when it came to the Eurobond, which turned out to have a number of scandals behind, that was reported, it was prosecuted, and it was really frowned down upon. But that said, there is a feeling that still there is need for infrastructure, and Tanzania has been a recipient of infrastructure funding to be able to connect to bigger markets such as in DRC. And there is that idea that Tanzania also wants to compete with Kenya to be able to become sort of like the gateway to the East, in which Kenya has largely been considered. So those had been the aspirations of President, the predecessor, the previous president. But I think right now, Tanzania still eyes the regional market, still feels there's need for infrastructure funding, but most importantly, for their population of well over 50 million people, unemployment is a major problem. And it's only the small businesses, it's the small firms which can be able to create those kind of jobs. So in as much as Tanzania wants to play on the global stage, there'll be a big focus on what are the things that can be done very quickly in the local communities to be able to create those jobs.
So you have emphasized on looking at the local economies, as you said, and also agriculture beyond the oil and gas conversation that Tanzania may be having. The president was at the United Nations General Assembly, and she promised the world that Tanzania has turned a new page and offered to correct some of the laws on investment and governance. What does the country need to do to attract more investments? You talked a bit about what the country can do for local economies, giving them tax breaks or tax rebates or reducing even the rate of the taxes that they pay. But if she's on an international stage, on a global stage, and offering Tanzania and opening the doors to investors from across the world, what's Tanzania going to offer them? What are the changes to the regulatory system, to the business environment that Tanzania can offer investors to make it more business friendly?
Well, I believe she will be on a charm offensive to really talk about reimagining a new Tanzania, the investment opportunities in tourism, in oil and gas. Tanzania is one of the largest oil and gas reserves in the world. So she'll definitely be attracting those. She'll probably be taking a softer tone from her predecessor, Magufuli, who was very keen that in as much as you're investing in Tanzania, you need to be paying their fair share of tax. There's significant tax evasion by some of the mining companies in Tanzania, and Magufuli was very strict on that. So I think she'll try to play that, strike a balance between attracting global investors, saying Tanzania is open for business, but also making sure that they are paying their fair share of taxes and they are contributing to the local communities. I think if she can succeed that, I think she can be quite successful in her initiatives.
All right, Ken, before I let you go, the president also informed global investors that Tanzania has finally signed the agreement for the African Continental Free Trade Area. Many people are happy about that. Officially kicked off on January the 1st of this year, bringing forth a combined market of 1.3 billion people across the continent. What was really holding Tanzania back before now from signing, and have any of those issues and concerns been addressed, or it's just a situation of a change in leadership, a change in how the leadership thinks in relation to what the leadership wants to do for the economy?
Well, even if we just look at the East African community, there had been concerns that the neighboring countries, including Kenya, were having sort of
A leg up.
bigger opportunities in Tanzania than their locals. So there was a big protectionism in terms of we need to protect Tanzanians, create jobs from Tanzanians, and really shield the country from too much expatriates who are coming from the region. And that's only within the East African community. Now, you can imagine being part of a 54-country arrangement. I think it's going to be much harder, because you'll find migration. Definitely people will want to come and look for those opportunities. So again, it's going to be that ever-challenging balance between how do you protect your local economies, but still remain sufficiently plugged in to be part of a Pan-African conversation. That really is where actually politics begins.
And I think it's a conversation we'll pick up with you as well. It was one of the reasons Nigeria also held out on signing the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. There is a lot of protectionism we're seeing, not just on the continent, but also around the world as it relates to economies as well. Ken, thank you as always for joining me. We'll definitely be touching base with you on a number of issues going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. And Tanzania has had a change of leadership, and maybe that change is about to pay off. You'll remember in the beginning I told you it's been a number of years since a Tanzanian president attended and even spoke at the United Nations General Assembly. Now, President Samia Suluhu Hassan did just that a few days ago, and she told investors in the global community that Tanzania is open for business. But as Ken pointed out, the local economies are truly the key to unlocking Tanzania's potential. A fine balance to be met. Can the president do that? Well, time will tell, and we'll be watching to find out. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. And this is NC4 to watch as we wrap things up. A few stories we're keeping our eyes on. We starts in the southern part of the continent, where South Africa recorded its first quarterly primary budget surplus since 2018 in the 3 months through June, a sign that efforts to bring spending in line with revenue are succeeding. The government's primary balance swung up to a surplus of 9.8 billion rand, or 0.6% of gross domestic product, in the first quarter of the 2021 fiscal year, compared with a deficit of 2.2% of GDP in the previous 3 months. Data released by Stats South Africa shows that the country lost 86,000 jobs as the number of employed persons decreased from around 9.6 million in the first quarter of the year to 9.5 million in the second quarter of 2021. The drop in employment was largely due to decreases in the manufacturing, community services, construction, electricity, and business services sectors. There was, however, increases in the mining and transport sectors, while the trade industry reported no change over the same period. An analysis of loan data by the China-Africa Research Initiative estimates that Zambia's debt to Chinese public and private lenders is $6.6 billion, almost double the amount disclosed by the previous Zambian government. The copper-rich country became Africa's first coronavirus-era sovereign default last November. Its ongoing debt restructuring has become a test case of Western multilateral efforts for countries to fully disclose their borrowings. And finally, Zimbabwe has been asked to settle a $70 million debt after it lost an international arbitration case over canceled nickel and platinum ventures between a private company and the state miner from more than a decade ago. Companies linked to Amaplat Mauritius Limited made the proposal in a letter to Zimbabwe's Secretary for Finance and Economic Development. The alternative is having the assets of the Zimbabwe Mining Development Corporation seized. The case also highlights the challenges faced by Zimbabwe as it seeks to use its mineral wealth to kickstart a stagnant economy after years of erratic policy decisions and asset seizures sapped investor confidence. And it's a wrap on Business Edge. You can head to our YouTube channel and subscribe if you've missed any of our conversations on the big business, economic and financial conversations coming from here on the continent. Follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV, and download our mobile app and take us with you wherever you go. We're also streaming live on StarTimes channel 274 and available on a number of other platforms. I'll see you again soon. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. Do have a pleasant day.